Good morning. Wow. This is amazing. This is amazing to be here. Now, I've only got a few minutes, so I thought if it's all right with you, I'm going to tell you about two of my heroes. The first is one of my own teachers. In many ways, every time I stand in front of an audience like this and share with them my thoughts through a speech, it's a testament to him. It's his legacy. You see, when I was 10 years old, I had a stutter, a stammer. I, like many kids, sadly, had gone through the experience of a very messy divorce between my parents, a very angry divorce. And as the result, had suffered the consequences. You know, I can stand here honestly today and tell you that as a 10-year-old child, I exhibited so many of the characteristics of a child in stress. I wet the bed as a 10-year-old boy, which, as you can imagine, is a mortifying thing. And I had a stammer. And then I met this remarkable man. This remarkable man who was supposed to be just my English teacher, who took an interest in me, who started to feel there was something beneath this child who wasn't particularly academic, but was clearly in distress. And his passion was drama. And he decided one day that the best way to help me with my stammer was to get me involved in drama, because he believed that if I was speaking somebody else's lines, it wouldn't necessarily have the impact it would that when I spoke for myself. Anyway, it worked, because here I am, right? Thank you. Now, the tragedy about this man is, because I have to tell you, I live every day with regret about this man, whose name was David Drew Smythe. Because I, like many kids, lost contact with my teacher when I moved on to secondary education, and he emigrated to Australia. And I never thought I'd see him again, until a couple of years ago, when we reconnected through Facebook. And as luck would have it, I was going out to Sydney to give a speech around that time. So I said, look, let's meet up for a beer, because I wanted to say thank you to him for everything that he'd done for me. And then the greatest tragedy happened to me. I was at London Airport waiting to fly to Sydney, and I got a message telling me that he'd died suddenly at the age of 65 years of age, in between me being in London and flying to Sydney. And I remember sitting there lonely in the airport, thinking to myself, I need to say something about this man. Anyway, my new book comes out next month, and the best way I could do it was to think, how can I capture it? I wanted to dedicate the book to him, which I've done. And the phrase that kept coming back into my head is the one I've used for the dedication, and it's this: that he changed the way I viewed my world forever. And I would suggest that that is the greatest testament to any educator or anyone working with young people, that that is what we should strive to do. But the irony is, I want to now tell you about my second hero, because it happens the other way round too. So I often get asked, as I'm sure many of you do, who my heroes are, who the great gurus are that have influenced my life and my career. And I honestly believe that the people that have had the most profound impact on my life are the children I've been privileged enough to teach. Looking back on my teaching career, I'm convinced that they taught me far more than ever I taught them. And there's one child in particular whose name is Gary, who was in my first ever class as a 9-year-old child. And those of us that are teachers know that it's one of those remarkable things. We never forget the first class of children we ever teach. And actually, the further in time they go, the more wonderful they seem to be in our memories. They probably weren't that way, to be honest, but when anyway, Gary was in my first class. Now, Gary was a child who today would be identified as having many complex special needs. But unfortunately for Gary, when I started teaching and when he was in my class, special needs hadn't been invented yet. You know, in those days, you were either stupid or naughty. There was no such thing as special needs, right? So don't shoot the messenger. So I didn't have a lot of hopes for Gary. But within a week of meeting him, I knew that he was quite possibly one of the most remarkable human beings I had ever come across in my life. Our first week in our school, the head teacher was a visionary, and instead of getting the kids to go straight into the normal curriculum, the first week of the school year would always be a charity week. And the head teacher would invite a leader from a charity in to talk to the students, and then the children would spend the whole week raising money in different ways, and then on the Friday, the leader from the charity would come back and the children would present a check. And this was a school in a tough neighborhood where we were. And this guy came in on the Monday and he gave a really moving speech about his charity. I don't remember the scandal at the end of the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s, that broke in Romania about the treatment of orphans. So this man had set up a charity to raise money to build an amazing facility for the orphans in Romania. And it was moving. And through the week, we were raising money for charity. And on the Friday, again, I don't know if you know, but in most UK state schools, children wear uniform, right? And one of the ways we raise money is by extorting the children and telling them on one day a week, they're allowed to wear their own clothes instead of their uniform, but they have to pay for the privilege. It's why, frankly, Britain's in such a mess right now, right? No child has ever questioned this in a free democratic society. So you want me to pay to wear the clothes I have already paid to wear? They never ask. So the Friday came about, right, and I'm doing my registration, and the kids are all coming up and putting a few pennies in a tin. And I get to Gary's name, and there's no clink in the tin. There's a thud on my desk. And I look up. And Gary has put his entire money box on my desk. Now, I don't know what the exchange rate is at the moment between Norway and the States. Is it about 9 or 10 to the right? So if I tell you this was a 9-year-old child in a socially deprived community over 20 years ago, we worked out later there was over 1,000 Norwegian crowns in this money box. And I said, you can't give us that money. And he did that thing. You know, kids do it. They body language and face when they're about to go on to one, when they're about to explode. You know, they kind of go like this. They go. I thought, I don't have time for that now, frankly. So I thought, what I'll do is at break time, I'll phone your mother, right? So I phoned his mother at break. I thought I'd have the conversation with her. She was expecting my call, because as soon as she picked up the phone, she said, this is about the money box, isn't it? I said, yes. I said, we can't take it. She said, you have to. I said, we can't. She said, you have to. I need to explain to you why, Mr. Gerver. She said, I have always taught my children, she had an older daughter as well, that if they want something in life, they have to earn it. By the way, wouldn't it be brilliant if all of our parents taught our children that? They have to earn it. And she said, Gary has grown out of his bicycle and has been desperate for a new bicycle. So he's been saving his birthday and Christmas money, and he's been going out and cleaning cars and doing gardening for people in the local community and saving his money. She said he came home Monday so moved by the assembly on Romania that he said then, Mummy, I want to give my money. And she said, I've been arguing with him all week. Until last night, she said, when I was convinced he knew what he was talking about. Because he turned round to me and he said, Mummy, please don't make me buy that bicycle now. I'd never enjoy riding it knowing where the money could have gone. Now, I don't know many adults who are that philanthropic, let alone 9-year-old children. So he was a hero to me from that day. Anyway, like most of us that teach in elementary school, he left the school a year later, and I thought I'd never see him again. But he was one of those students, and I'm sure any of you involved in education and young people have got experiences like this. He was one of those students that on a quiet day I would often think about and wonder, whatever happened to? And a remarkable thing happened 3 years ago. Because in my first book, I wrote a tiny paragraph about Gary, that story, as being a key motivator for my philosophy around education. And a week after the book was published, my wife, who's a school principal, got a phone call from one of her colleagues saying, I've just read Richard's book. Now, I was just excited that somebody had read my book, frankly. Really? And you paid for it? And she said, I've read Richard's book, and there's a paragraph, she said, in the book. She said about a boy called Gary. She said, is it true? And my wife said, yeah, absolutely, because my wife and I at the time had taught in the same school. She said, yeah, absolutely. She said, that's amazing, because I think I know Gary now. She said, do you think that Richard would like to meet Gary? Anyway, she knew I would. So we arranged it. And a week later, I found myself sitting in a frothy coffee shop, waiting for a 10-year-old boy to walk through the door. So imagine my shock when a 6'2" man walks into the building, right? Now, the thing is this, the only reason I recognized it was Gary was because one of his very severe special needs was he had very severe dyspraxia, you know, the motor problems. And you know, children that have severe dyspraxia often find it very difficult. They have to walk in a very deliberate way. So I recognized the walk, and we sat down. And I asked him the question that any of you would ask your Gary, what happened after you left our school? He said, well, it won't surprise you to know that I failed all my exams. I left school at 16. He said, I did try. It was like I was still his teacher. You know, I did try. I worked really hard. It's easy, isn't it? He said, but I didn't pass any of my exams. He said, I left with nothing. He said, but I don't know if you remember that when I was at your school, he said, I was passionate about sports. And I said, yes, I do. He said, but, you know, I was never able to compete properly with the other children because some of my complex needs. But he was absolutely passionate about sports. He said, so I decided when I left school, what I wanted to do was to work in a sports centre, in a leisure centre in sports management. So he said, I applied to the local college who ran a course on sports management. I said, what happened? He said, I didn't get in. They sent me a really nice note saying, dear Gary, you sound like a lovely young man, but we don't think you'll cope with the academic rigour of the course. Now, what would most 16-year-old boys who had experienced so much failure in their lives do at that point? They'd give up, right? He didn't. He said, I learnt. He said, so what I then did was I applied to the best college in the country who did a sports management course. He said, but I learnt, you see. He said, and what happened was this. I went in with my application form on a Monday morning and I said, can I see the admissions tutor, please? And they said, no. So he said, I'm leaving. But he went back on the Tuesday. Can I see the admissions tutor, please? No. He did the same thing Wednesday and Thursday. By Friday, they were so sick of him. They said, here's the admissions tutor. Anyway, he got on the course. Not only did he get on the course, he qualified top in his year. When he finished his course, he said to me he knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He said, but I needed another qualification. He said, and I found a course that ran on Saturdays for a whole year in London, 120 miles south of where we lived. He said, so what I did was I worked during the week, saved up, this is an 18-year-old boy, I saved up the money to pay for my train fare, a night in a hostel, and my course fees for the Saturday for a year, and then I qualified. I said, and what did you do? He said, I started the business I still run today. I said, what's that? He said, my business, he said, I saw a gap in the market. He said, I'm a personal fitness trainer specializing in people with physical and mental disabilities. So then I said to him, and what about your spare time? He said, I don't really have any spare time because of my business. He said, but I do shut the business down in December. He said, because it appears nobody wants to get fit in December. He said, and what I do is I take the profit from my company that I've earned all year, and he said, I've developed a relationship with a village in West Africa, and he said, I go out there and I spend December helping them to develop the skills and things that I do around fitness and health. You can imagine, by now, I am absolutely in tears, right? I'm also arrogant. So by this time, through this conversation, I've thought to myself, this is all because of me. I asked him the question, I asked him the question, I sat back like I hadn't thought about it. I crossed my legs, picked up my frothy coffee. And I said, who would you say had, apart from your mother, had been the biggest influence on your life? Anyway, he didn't say me, so I've never seen him again since. But here's my point as I close. To me, Gary was a hero at 9. What he achieved through his life was truly remarkable. He achieved most of that in spite of the system. And I would say this, Gary didn't go to university, he didn't get a high degree, he didn't go and work in a big company, but I would suggest to you that Gary is the ultimate 21st century citizen. And what we need is an education system that finds the Gary in every single child. Thank you very much.